Hey, I'm Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my favorite mechanism in the game Elevenses, the Guilty Party. When I got this game on Kickstarter, I actually thought it was a large group social deduction bluffing game. I thought it was a party game based on the title. It isn't exactly a party game. It is a lighter game that plays up to, I believe, 5 players. We played it at 3 players the other day. And it is a game of having a tea party where a murder has happened. And one of the players is guilty and all the other players are not. And that guilty party can actually shift around throughout the game. Throughout the game, you are playing cards from your hand. The cards look like this. Oftentimes, you're passing cards around the table. So even though each player starts out with the same kind of set of cards, the cards that they actually have available might change throughout the game. And a lot of these cards change your suspicion levels. And this is my favorite mechanism, my favorite little twist in the game. Because at the end of the game, it's as if a detective shows up and interviews everyone at the party after this murder has happened and looks at everyone's suspicion, these white tokens that are on the table. And the player with the most suspicion is that detective's main target. That detective is going to look at that player and suspect them above all other players. If that player is the player who actually did it, they're going to reveal a card that shows that they actually did have the murder weapon. Here's a knife. Here's some poison. There's only one of them in each game. They'll look to see if you actually were the murderer, and if that player with the most suspicion is the murderer, then the other player with the lowest suspicion ends up winning. However, if the detective shows up and that player with the most suspicion is not the player who was actually guilty of committing the murder, then the player who was the actual guilty party just wins the game. And so part of the game is deducing as you play, and you do it through playing these cards that I showed you, some of which involve even looking at or shifting around the murder weapon. But also they include shifting around suspicion. So as you start to deduce who is the actual murderer, or you create whoever the murderer is by shifting around the suspicion, the murder weapon, then you start to pile on suspicion onto that player so that the main detective starts to suspect that player. But by doing that, you're also kind of putting the target on yourself, because why would you pile on suspicion to another player, taking that suspicion off you? And even you can do this in the game without even really bluffing, because the game wants you to have lower suspicion. Because again, if the detective does correctly choose the player with the most suspicion, and they are the guilty party, then it is the player with the lowest suspicion who ends up winning. So I think this is just a pretty clever suspicion system in the game, that they become the target, you create the target through suspicion, and that determines whether who is eligible for winning the game. Is it the other players, or is it the actual guilty party who got away with it by not having the most suspicion at the end of the game? A little convoluted there, a little convoluted explanation, but hopefully that made some sense as I was explaining Elevenses, the Guilty Party game. Neat little party game. I could see this pairing well with Tussie Mussy, another game with a very similar aesthetic, very different approach to the theme, but I think they can be played back to back, including the game Obsession. That's a much longer but different game set in a similar era. I could see that working as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you've played any version of Elevenses. I think there have been different versions over the years. Let me know your favorite mechanism in the comments below. Thanks.